Listen closely, because what I am about to tell you is the story of how a seemingly innocent patch of dirt at the end of a driveway transformed into a literal war zone, costing me exactly $1,478 in mangled metal and concrete, while racking up over $5,000 in completely fraudulent, utterly fabricated homeowner association fines. All before I finally decided to stop being a victim and turn the tables on a neighborhood tyrant who thought she owned the very air we breathed. It all started with a dream that my fiercely loyal wife, Margaret, and I had nurtured for decades, a dream of leaving the chaotic grind behind and settling into our forever home, which we finally found tucked away in the lush, rolling hills of Loudoun County, Virginia, a beautiful 3-acre sanctuary boasting ancient oak trees whose branches felt like protective arms, a garden space large enough to feed an entire block, and a profound, echoing silence that made you entirely forget the roaring interstate miles away. I had spent 40 grueling years working as a structural engineer, living and breathing by the sacred doctrine of measuring twice and cutting once, a philosophy built on meticulous planning, unyielding precision, and the quiet satisfaction of executing a job so perfectly the first time that it never haunts your future. And I was more than ready to apply that exact same unwavering rigor to the quiet, peaceful twilight of my retirement. However, as we quickly, and rather painfully, discovered, our rustic little slice of Appalachian heaven came with a microscopic, venomous string attached, as our property line technically, and I mean by the absolute thinnest margin imaginable, bled into the boundaries of a pristine, sterile, and aggressively manicured master plan subdivision known to the local tax assessors as Whispering Pines Reserve. The string attached to this technicality had a name, and her name was Patricia, a woman in her late 60s who served as the undisputed, tyrannical president of the local property owners board, a woman who patrolled the winding asphalt streets in a blindingly white Cadillac Escalade, perpetually sporting a tennis visor even when shielded by a roof, possessing eyes that didn't just look at you but mathematically calculated your worth, found you severely lacking, and condemned you to her personal purgatory, all within the span of a single, icy heartbeat. We met her at a neighborhood welcome luncheon where, holding a paper plate bearing a single, tragically dry cookie, she approached us with a smile so synthetic it could have been manufactured in a lab, looking out over our older, charmingly untamed lot that stood in stark defiance to her endless rows of identical postage stamp yards, and delivered a masterclass in passive aggression by noting how incredibly exhausting it must be for people of our age to try and drag such a dilapidated, outdated parcel up to the impeccable, lofty visual standards of Whispering Pines Reserve. That was her opening volley, a warning shot fired across our proverbial bow. But the real theater of war, the absolute epicenter of the madness that would consume my life for months, became the mailbox. Because our rural property lacked a receptacle for the post, I spent a glorious, sun-drenched Saturday doing what I love most, getting my hands dirty, purchasing a heavy-duty, federally approved metal box and a thick cedar post, spending hours perfectly leveling the hole, mixing the heavy concrete until it was the exact right consistency, and setting that post so securely that a hurricane would have to think twice before challenging it. Spreading fresh, fragrant cedar mulch around the base, I felt a deep, resonant swell of pride, patting the sturdy wood as a silent declaration that we had finally arrived, that we were home, only to return a week later from a routine grocery run to find my handiwork absolutely annihilated. The thick cedar post snapped like a dry twig, the heavy metal box crushed into an unrecognizable, crumpled accordion of steel, its bright red flag twisted into a mocking spiral, and deep, aggressive tire trenches gouged violently into the soft shoulder of the road. Margaret, always the eternal optimist, sighed heavily and blamed careless local teenagers. And while every instinct in my tired bones desperately wanted to believe her, wanted to write it off as random, senseless suburban vandalism that you just have to swallow and move past, the grating, agonizing screech of that twisted metal as I forcefully wrenched the ruined post from its concrete tomb sparked a tiny, hot ember of suspicion deep in my chest. So, swallowing my rising irritation, I did it all over again, purchasing upgraded materials, mixing fresh concrete, and this time, employing heavy-duty carriage bolts to anchor the post to the subterranean footing, ensuring that if lightning or reckless kids struck again, the repair would be swifter. And wanting to be a good, compliant neighbor, I even painted the post a rich, dignified hunter green that perfectly complemented the historic trim on our farmhouse. Exactly 48 hours later, a stiff, cream-colored envelope was shoved through the brass slot of our front door, bearing the embossed, pretentious crest of the Whispering Pines Reserve Board, containing not a neighborly greeting, but a cold, legally threatening notice of violation. The letter ruthlessly cited a microscopic, buried clause in the bylaws dictating that all mail receptacles and their supporting structures must strictly adhere to a mandatory color palette, specifically a soul-crushing, hopelessly drab shade they dubbed Heritage Sandstone, fining me $75 for my hunter green rebellion and granting me 2 weeks to eradicate my noncompliance before further financial ruin would be brought upon my household. Heritage Sandstone wasn't just a color. It was the visual embodiment of absolute despair, the hue of forgotten waiting rooms and lukewarm oatmeal, a color so violently bland that it felt like an insult to the very concept of vision. Yet, desperately clinging to the hope of maintaining peace, I drove to the hardware store, choked down my pride, purchased a quart of the mandatory misery, and spent my weekend painting over my beautiful green post, taking a time-stamped photo to email to the management company as proof of my utter, humiliating submission. I thought that would be the end of it, but when Tuesday rolled around, we pulled into our driveway to find the freshly painted, compliant mailbox entirely flattened again, smashed into the dirt with the exact same vehicular ferocity as the first. But this time, as I knelt in the damp earth inspecting the splintered wreckage of my surrender, I saw it. A tiny, unmistakable, pearlescent white chip of automotive paint embedded deeply within the shattered wood grain. That infinitesimal flake of paint, perfectly matching the blinding sheen of Patricia's massive Cadillac Escalade, changed the entire molecular structure of the situation, instantly transforming this from a string of unfortunate accidents into a calculated, malicious declaration of war, sending a surge of molten anger through my veins that I quickly had to suppress. Because an engineer knows that rage is a messy, unreliable fuel, whereas cold, hard data is a weapon that never misses its mark. I drove straight to an outdoor outfitter, dropped $100 on a high-definition, motion-activated trail camera, the kind hunters use to track elusive game in the dead of night, and under the cover of a moonless sky, I crossed the street, scaled the lower branches of a massive, ancient oak tree bordering the neighborhood common area, strapped the camera tight, camouflaged it with dense foliage, angled the lens perfectly toward the killing floor, and went back to the hardware store for a third time. I built the exact same setup, painted it that same agonizing shade of Heritage Sandstone, bolted it down, and then I simply waited, checking the encrypted digital memory card every single morning with the jittery anticipation of an undercover operative, until less than 5 days later, the trap snapped shut. The infrared night vision footage was grainy but undeniably damning, displaying the time as 3:14 a.m., capturing the unmistakable, bulky silhouette of Patricia's white Cadillac, watching it intentionally decelerate, swerve aggressively off the pavement, deliberately crush my newly built property beneath its heavy passenger side tires with a violent, jarring shudder, and then seamlessly merge back onto the road, disappearing into the dark without the brake lights ever so much as flickering. I had the vehicle, I had the timestamp, I had the malicious action preserved forever in digital amber, and armed with my thumb drive, and the tiny plastic baggie containing the paint chip, I marched into the suffocatingly stuffy, fluorescent-lit community center for the monthly board meeting, ready to drop the hammer of justice on this rogue dictator. I sat through nearly 40 excruciating minutes of mindless, droning debate regarding the acceptable height of seasonal lawn ornaments before I was granted the floor, standing up with a calm, eerily detached professionalism, presenting my detailed timeline of destruction, holding up the tiny plastic evidence bag like a prosecutor at a murder trial, and finally opening my laptop to project the infrared footage of the vehicular assault for the entire miserable room to witness. The silence that followed the video was heavy, thick with tension, but Patricia, displaying the chilling, sociopathic calm of a true apex predator, merely scoffed, waving a diamond-ringed hand through the air, claiming that the blurry footage could be literally any white luxury SUV in the state of Virginia, loudly accusing me of unhinged, targeted harassment, while her spineless treasurer, a man who looked like he hadn't slept a full night since the late 90s, hastily agreed that the evidence was purely circumstantial and entirely inadmissible in their kangaroo court. I was dismissed, shut down by a corrupted system built solely to protect its reigning monarch, but the true counterstrike arrived 72 hours later via registered courier. A punitive letter assessing me an $800 fine for maintaining a blighted property, citing the very mailbox she had just run over, and an additional $400 penalty for attaching an unapproved surveillance device to a tree that the board claimed fell under their absolute jurisdiction. That was the precise moment the rational, compromising retiree in me officially died, making way for a relentlessly focused, hyper-analytical engineer who realized that if this woman was going to bludgeon me with her localized, petty rulebook, I needed to locate a much larger, heavier rulebook to drop squarely on her head, leading me to spend 3 sleepless nights fueled by black coffee, scouring county ordinances, state property laws, and finally, the colossal, intimidating labyrinth of federal regulations. Deep within the endless, convoluted pages of the United States Postal Service Operations Manual, I struck absolute gold, discovering a deeply buried federal statute explicitly stating that while homeowners purchase the physical box, the receptacle itself falls under sweeping federal protection regarding access and delivery, meaning that any local aesthetic mandate that functionally interferes with the secure delivery of the United States mail is entirely superseded by federal law. I drafted a masterpiece of a letter, aggressively polite but radiating pure, unadulterated legal menace, citing the exact federal codes, accusing the board's repeated actions and subsequent punitive fines of constituting an active, documented interference with federal mail delivery, a literal federal offense, and ensuring that I CC'd the regional postmaster general, sending the entire explosive package via certified mail to watch how a small-town tyrant would react to the looming shadow of the federal government. For a brief, glorious window, the strategy worked absolute wonders. The extortionate fines mysteriously vanished from my online resident portal without a single word of apology or acknowledgement. The temperature in the neighborhood dropped to a frosty, paranoid chill, and Patricia refused to even glance in my direction when driving past, though I could feel her calculating eyes burning into the back of my skull, analyzing the perimeter, desperately searching for a weakness in my newly fortified defenses. Knowing this was merely a tactical retreat and not a surrender, I decided it was time to implement a permanent, physical solution, drafting complex blueprints for a structure that I privately dubbed the monolith, heading to a commercial supply yard to purchase a 1/4-inch thick, galvanized steel rural delivery vault, accompanied by 30 bags of industrial-strength concrete, thick steel rebar, and an entire pallet of heavy, dark red masonry bricks that perfectly mirrored the foundation of our house. I spent the entire weekend transforming myself back into a heavy laborer, digging a crater, pouring a massive, reinforced subsurface anchor, and meticulously laying brick after heavy brick. The sharp, metallic scrape of my trowel and the earthy, wet scent of fresh mortar filling my soul with a profound sense of permanence and defiance, until I had successfully encased the steel vault inside a 2-foot-thick, impregnable column of solid, reinforced masonry. Stepping back, wiping the sweat and mortar dust from my brow, I gazed upon a structure that looked less like a suburban mail receptacle and more like a hardened military bunker designed to withstand a direct mortar strike, silently daring Patricia to test the structural integrity of her pristine luxury vehicle against my immovable object, fully expecting a violent, shattering collision in the dead of night. But she never struck it. Instead, she executed a maneuver of such breathtaking, bureaucratic evil that I genuinely had to admire her dark genius. Parking her vehicle across the street in broad daylight, snapping dozens of high-resolution photos of my new fortress, and disappearing, only to be replaced a week later by a heavy-duty yellow truck bearing the official seal of the Loudoun County Department of Public Works. A weary, apologetic inspector in a bright reflective vest stepped out with a heavy clipboard, informing me with a sympathetic wince that an anonymous, deeply concerned citizen had filed a formal complaint regarding an unpermitted, hazardous structure erected within the county's public right-of-way, explaining that while a standard wooden post was permissible, my magnificent brick tower legally constituted a permanent structural hazard within 20 feet of the road's center line. Patricia had bypassed her own petty bylaws and weaponized the actual government against me, resulting in the inspector handing me a devastating, non-negotiable demolition order demanding that I tear down my indestructible masterpiece at my own agonizing expense within 14 days, or face catastrophic daily fines and a potential lien against my home, leaving me standing in the driveway, holding the dreaded pink slip, staring at my monumental failure. I retreated to my dimming home office, utterly crushed, surrounded by the expensive receipts of 4 ruined mailboxes and a mountain of legal threats, feeling the crushing weight of defeat pressing down on my chest as Margaret placed a gentle, pleading hand on my shoulder, begging me to just rent a post office box in town, to surrender for the sake of our sanity and our blood pressure. Any sane, rational human being would have taken their wife's advice and walked away. But as I stared blindly at the county's demolition mandate, an icy, unbreakable resolve crystallized in the pit of my stomach, fueled by the realization that this was no longer a dispute over a metal box, but a desperate battle against a virulent strain of bullying that threatened to poison the sanctuary of our final years. Rejecting defeat, I marched to the hall closet, dragged out the massive, heavy accordion file containing our original closing documents from the property purchase, dumped the avalanche of dense legal paperwork across the dining room table, and spent hours agonizingly translating the archaic, mind-numbing legalese of the original 1980s property covenants until my exhausted eyes finally locked onto a delicate, folded, faded blue plat map tucked deep inside a hidden pocket. Spreading the fragile, oversized blueprint across the table, my heart began to hammer violently against my ribs as I traced an ancient, faint dotted line running exactly 15 feet parallel to the asphalt, a line clearly labeled Public Utility Access Easement, sending me scrambling back through the dense text of the covenants to confirm a revelation that hit me with the force of a freight train. The documents explicitly mandated that the HOA, not the individual homeowner, was legally, financially, and physically responsible for the perpetual maintenance of all designated utility easements, meaning that the very patch of dirt where my mailboxes had been repeatedly slaughtered belonged to their jurisdiction, rendering every single fine they had ever levied against me for failure to maintain entirely fraudulent, and more importantly, placing any utility-related structure built within that specific strip strictly under municipal authority, utterly exempt from the HOA's tyrannical cosmetic laws. I instantly shifted from a battered defender to a ruthless attacker, assembling a specialized strike team beginning with Old Man Higgins, a gloriously grumpy, retired state surveyor who lived down the road and despised Patricia with the heat of 1,000 dying suns, who happily marched over with his vintage tripod in transit, officially staking the exact line of the federal easement with a gleeful, wicked cackle. My next call was to Jessica, a razor-sharp, fiercely aggressive property rights attorney specializing in dismantling corrupt HOA boards, who formulated a lethal, 3-pronged strategy. First, invoicing the HOA for thousands of dollars in property damage that occurred on land they were legally obligated to protect. Second, bypassing the HOA entirely to apply for a specialized county permit to install an official mail access utility point and registered survey monument, essentially classifying the mailbox as protected municipal infrastructure. And third, calling my old fabricator buddy Marcus to construct a steel beast that would make a tank reconsider its life choices. Marcus welded a custom, quarter-inch plate steel juggernaut featuring an angled, reinforced prow specifically engineered to transfer the devastating kinetic energy of any vehicular impact directly down into a massive, 4-foot-deep subterranean cage of high-strength concrete and rebar, topped with a genuine, brass county survey marker provided by Higgins, and surrounded by a moat of the most vicious, razor-sharp native thorn bushes legally available for purchase. We executed our plan with terrifying precision, having Jessica serve the HOA with a certified, heavily itemized invoice for over $4,000, while Higgins, and I marched our ironclad paperwork into the county planning office, easily securing an irrefutable government stamp permit that legally bulletproofed our upcoming installation against any local aesthetic interference. When Patricia inevitably realized she was being financially assaulted and legally outmaneuvered, she attempted to incite a digital riot on the community's private social media page, painting me as a deranged, property value-destroying lunatic. But her desperate smear campaign only served to guarantee a massive audience for installation day, drawing dozens of curious, whispering neighbors to their lawns as Marcus's heavy diesel crane truck and a roaring concrete mixer descended upon my property. At 8 in the morning, like a predictable clockwork demon, Patricia's white Cadillac came screeching to a chaotic halt on the grass, her phone already recording as she shrieked threats of lawsuits and police intervention, making good on her promise by summoning two stern-looking county sheriff deputies who arrived with lights flashing, ready to shut down the madness. But when the lead deputy, hand resting cautiously on his utility belt, approached me to demand answers, I simply handed him a pristine binder containing our county-approved permits, the registered survey map, the federal utility statutes, and my attorney's contact information, watching with deep satisfaction as his authoritative demeanor shifted to a nod of profound respect. Turning to a smug, expectant Patricia, the deputy systematically dismantled her entire worldview in front of the assembled neighborhood, firmly stating that not only was the construction a fully permitted, federally protected utility installation occurring within a registered easement, but that if she dared to step foot on the site again, she would be immediately arrested for obstructing a licensed municipal project, leaving her publicly humiliated, completely powerless, and fleeing the scene. In absolute, shattered disgrace. The killing blow was delivered at the next emergency board meeting, a standing-room-only spectacle where my attorney Jessica calmly approached the front table, distributing thick binders containing our massive, overdue invoice threatening immediate liens, photographic proof of Patricia's own blatant, hypocritical fence violations, and a legally verified petition signed by over 60% of the furious community demanding her immediate recall for gross fiscal mismanagement and targeted harassment. The entire room erupted into a deafening roar of approval, instantly voting to strip her of her manufactured crown, leading to her silent, ghostly exit from the building, the swift appearance of a for sale sign on her manicured lawn a few weeks later, and the rapid election of a new, sane board that immediately cut me a check for the full damages, utilizing the massive slush fund Patricia had hoarded to finally build the neighborhood playground the children had been begging for. Today, my legendary, indestructible steel sentinel stands quietly at the edge of the road, a dark, silent monument to righteous defiance, possessing a few minor scratches from passing kids who tap its hull for good luck, serving as a powerful, enduring reminder to the entire community that you never have to roll over and surrender your dignity just because a petty dictator holds a tiny gavel. We fought a brutal, exhausting war simply for the right to exist peacefully on our own land, utilizing the very bureaucratic weapons forged to destroy us. And while the neighborhood finally found its peace, it leaves me wondering, when the system is deliberately rigged by those in power to crush the individual, is weaponizing their own rules against them the ultimate form of justice, or just another descent into the very darkness we were fighting against?
Alright, and that is for today's videos. I hope you enjoyed it and found something useful. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe and share it with your friends. Let me know your thoughts in the comment below. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.